Welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. I am Adestola Omorwan.
I'm Rufai Oseni.
And I'm Shaito Atigari.
Well, let's share the conversation this morning. In Nigeria, tax administration is vested in the three tiers of government. Taxes payable to the federal government are administered by the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FRSC, while those payable to the state government are administered by the state boards of internal revenue services. Now, of the 36 states of the Federation, while the local governments also administer rates and levies collectible by them through their various councils.
In addition, there are a good number of taxes payable by persons doing business in Nigeria. These include companies' income tax, personal tax, capital gains tax, value-added tax, education tax, technology tax, stamp duties, and withholding tax.
The direct benefit of paying taxes for everyone is that they are used to pay for services that governments provide to communities. But how effective is the payment of taxes by Nigerians? According to the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, 80% of Nigerians don't pay tax. And to clarify this statement, Mr. Yomi Olugbenro, the West Africa tax leader at Deloitte and fellow of both the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, ICANN, and Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, CITN, joins us now. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Good morning. Now, with 80% of Nigerians still not paying tax, we would say the immediate answer to this is the quality of the administration and enforcement of these agencies. Why do you think we still have a high number of Nigerians that don't pay tax in 2019?
Well, it's a multifaceted issue. So it's not a problem that started yesterday. So it's a problem that's been with us for years. When that statistic that you alluded to, I think it was the NESG, that did a citizen survey and came up with this revelation that maybe only 80% are within the tax net and probably just about 14 are those that are actual active taxpayer. What has happened is that between the collection and the enforcement mechanism that's operate within the country, the regulatory framework, that somehow appear opaque and all of the challenges we're battling with, and also just oppose that with what I call trust deficit, when people just don't see, the compelling reason for them to do what is right. So, and that's why we're where we are. A lot of efforts are going on, by the way, in trying to, change the narratives and change the story. As at the time that survey was issued, I think the NBS say we have close to 70 million, maybe 69.5 million or so of Nigerians who are active economically, and only 14 million, as at that particular time, are registered with the tax authority. That's about 20%. And not even all the 14 million are active taxpayer. Maybe about 10 million or so are active in paying taxes because they are in active paid employment. So that's where we are. It's a whole lot of issues. You can blame it on the attitude of the people. You can have enough reasons to to talk to those who are administering the system, and the rules we're using, and all of that. But I think the beauty of it all is that we've all gotten to a point where we've suddenly realized that we've got to fix this, because we're no longer in an era where the oil money continues to come in droves and the way we used to have it. So now there's a forced reawakening of how critical and how important it is for us to pay taxes, because we need the money to finance all of the infrastructure and to deliver the public goods. A whole lot of things going on, and maybe in the course of this conversation, we will touch on many of them.
Right. This comes to mind. You remember the first time of this administration, you had things like the Voluntary Asset Declaration Scheme, VADES program, that was touted to bring a lot of people into the tax net. You had the constant campaign by FIRS to bring a lot of people into the tax net. But it's still quite low. Look at the numbers, 6% in general, tax to GDP ratio in this country. If you go down across the border, the country we call Nigeria's 37th state, Benin Republic, close to over 14% tax to GDP ratio in the country. Go across board, go to Europe. The average OECD threshold is 40% tax to GDP ratio. Have we survived with a 6% tax to GDP? Because it's almost funny.
That's right. So our issues are deep, and sometimes we like quick fixes in this country. the truth is that there is no quick fix to this issue, because the amount of tax that you collect within an economy, it's a measure of the economic prosperity within that particular country. So within the same space of period we're talking about, the company had gone through recession and we're still hanging in maybe on one leg as we speak. The growth is still very fragile. So until we do enough to make the economic very buoyant, very productive, we're not going to be able to get to where we want to go. So sometimes when I hear the government talk about we want to raise tax to GDP from 6%, we want to move it to 15%, I'm like, so, I mean, like a friend, just loosely say on top of what, So where's that going to be coming from? So the economy needs to be buoyant. The individual needs to earn sufficiently before you could tax and collect, a reasonable amount. So there's a whole lot of issues. So the economy itself needs to be fixed, and we need to do a lot in making sure that we get this economy thriving back to the 7%, back to the 8%, growth rate that we used to know, with 1-2% and in between growth that it's still very fledgling, and there's no way we can get so much. Look at the disposable income of individual. So individual need to earn a lot before we could ask for a fraction of that, and it will amount to something. Until we fix that, all of the efforts at trying to raise the tax to GDP, we just in a way further pushing down pressure and pain on the few that are still doing some stuff. So we need to be careful that in an attempt to grow the non-oil taxes or and grow tax penetration, we're mindful of the impact on the economy itself that is still on its knees.
The NSCG identified some possible factors responsible for this low numbers we are seeing, to include low morale, compliance, and trust. And then I want to take it back to Rufai's question, just to pick up from there. 2 years ago, the then finance minister brought up VAT. There was an amnesty for 12 months. This was to help broaden and increase revenue generation from tax. However, a World Bank report last year did say, that fell really short. They got only 8% of the $1 billion the government had projected. Why did you think that this failed partially, or was successful only partially? And do you think that it's something we can replicate again, perhaps improve on it?
All right, so I would say in terms of the revenue expectation, so we could conclude that it fall below expectation. So $1 billion USD, and you made just a fraction of that. Mm-hmm. But I think it succeeded in a number of ways. One is the level of awareness. So one of the things that the NESG report also did identify is the level of education and the level of awareness. People need to know what's payable. People need to know what their obligations are, when is it payable, and all of that. And one of the things that the VAT system, and there's a successor to that, the voluntary offshore asset regularization scheme, that came after the 1 year expiration of VAT. So one of the things that I think was a positive to be taken away from those amnesty scheme is the increased level of awareness. I mean, tax became like a boss on the social media. Tax Thursday, you started having a whole lot of campaign, and that was part, of the measure at growing the tax penetration. The other benefit to take away from it was also the increased level of tax registration that we had. I mean, if you add that to the National Tax Database project that is ongoing, what we're told is that against the 4 million registered individuals that we started from before VAT, we're likely going to raise the number of registered tax individuals in Nigeria to 45 million. Now, the contribution of VAT is also significant in that particular process, because part of the exercise towards VAT was to do this database consolidation, which is what grew into the National Tax Database project now. So what the government is doing now is record from CAC, record through your BVN, record through, all those pockets of databases that you see are now being merged together so that we can have a consolidated one reference point for all individuals that are eligible to pay tax within the country. That's one major step. So let's first of all have visibility over how much Adesua earns or how much Rufai earns, and who is involved in this economic activity. And that would be a major step. Once we do that, we can then push on to making sure that everyone who is eligible to pay tax pay the fair and right amount of taxes. Prior to now, I mean, it's so appalling. It's almost unbelievable that you have a landlord who has property. I mean, just an analogy. I have properties spread all over the country. I have tenants occupying each of those flats. I just don't have the database of who they are as the landlord. And here am I complaining about I don't have money. I mean, it's so ridiculous. That's exactly the state that Nigeria was. You know, we had 70 million economically active individuals. We only know 14 million of them. I mean, the tax authority only know 14 million. So if we could raise that to 45 million, that's at least a step forward. And then we could press further to then say, of this 45 million, I haven't seen you come to the tax office, or I haven't seen you, file your tax returns, or I saw your tax returns that completely is completely disconnected from what I could see from your BVN, of your banking record and all of that. So for me, I think there's still some measure of positive to take away from some of this. In
fact, I mean, just to cool down the tempo of things now, the popular singer Celine Dion sang a song about rain and tax, being inevitable. If you remember the tune, inevitable. But why tax or paying taxes is quite funny in this country is because of factors like multiple taxation. A lot of people favor a one direct approach to taxation. So I go on the tax portal website, I put in my tax detail, I have a platform where deductions, my VAT and everything is being taken once. Sort of like a single treasury account for taxation. But that's not the case. Multiple taxation, education tax, technology tax, blah, 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 and they're paid into different accounts. Also, the local governments to come, take their rates, state government come, take their own tax rates. Can't we have a joint system in a federal country where the federal, local, and state government they have an harmonized tax rate? So take, for instance, we know we're coming to take taxes from you, XYZ amount of your money will be deducted, and all the taxes are done. Not what we have today, that is a basket case. I think it's something we should have, a conversation on taxes itself. It's a basket.
Ease of paying taxes.
Ease of paying taxes. It's a basket case.
No, I agree absolutely with you. But in your introduction, you did mention that Nigeria is a federal structure. And part of the problem we're having with multiplicity of taxes and all of that is also, a fallout of that structure. So we have the federal, we have the state, we have the local government, each of them with different taxing power, constitutionally provided. And the list of taxes and levies, for example, there's actually a legislation called Approved Taxes and Levies Act, just paraphrasing it. There are different 9 taxes that the federal government is entitled to collect, 25 at state level. And I think 21 at the local government.
Say that again.
25.
25 at the state level?
Taxes and levies, and then 21 majorly levies at the local government.
So 46 plus 9 and 9 at the federal
55
level.
Actually.
55?
55 taxes and levies. And that's part of the issue. I think the government itself is doing more disservice to itself.
We'll go on a quick break. We'll come back. 55. Put that number in your head. 55.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Rise News. We still have with us Yomi Olugbenro, the West Africa tax leader at Deloitte and fellow of both the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, ICANN, and Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, CITN. Thank you so much for staying with us. Before that break, you did reveal some interesting figures. In fact, 55 taxes altogether that an average Nigerian would most likely pay.
That's correct. So that an average business in Nigeria will pay. But before we went on break, the point I was trying to make was that the fact that we actually have 55 on the list itself is a disservice that the government is doing to itself, because that list is made up predominantly of levies and charges that have no business being on a list of taxes acts. And when competitiveness of paying taxes and the ease of paying taxes of any economy is measured, that's part of the things that are being considered. So we don't need to have on that list levies for rental of car park or burial ground or TV license or radio license that people car license and all of that. Let's focus on the real tax, which ideally I think will be about 9 or thereabouts. And let's make sure that we have legislations in place that even though we're federal structure, and each state is supposed to have the exclusive and concurrent list, let's have guidelines as to how many number of taxes a state could have, for example. So if you want to introduce a new type of tax, for example, you should repeal an existing one or merge it all together. So we don't necessarily need to have different tax lines for virtually everything. So the day we're talking of how to improve education, there's an education tax. The day we're talking about, oh, maybe we can make some money from communication, somebody said we should introduce communication tax. You know, somebody said, oh, the technology companies are making so much money, let's have technology tax. All of these add to the difficulty and the challenges in paying taxes. And there's a connection with, you know, the level of tax penetration because of that. Because paying taxes is hard enough. Nobody wants to part with money. But making it difficult, making the process cumbersome, making the number of items and the number of agencies I need to be answerable to just makes it too challenging.
Yeah. How would you describe the tax policy in Nigeria at the moment? And are there any reforms you think that we need to take urgently? And when was the last time we reformed our tax policy? Okay, so we have a new national tax policy. That was one that was introduced during the administration prior to President Buhari's. All right, so but it wasn't actually implemented or publicized. When the new administration came in and the new Minister of Finance then came in, Kemi Adeosun, that was actually one of the things that was done. There was a committee headed by Professor Biola Sani and with representative of the big firms and the private sector. I also have one of our partners being a member of that committee, for example, and they came up with a revised national tax policy. Very simple, easy to read, I think about 15-page document or so. And for me, if there's actually any shining light in our tax system, it's actually our national tax policy. Okay. Now, very simple, provide clear direction of what should be done. How do we use tax to grow tax penetration? How do we use it to encourage SMEs? How do we use it to drive investment, and all of that? How do we cement, build closer ties with countries and all of that? We have just about 9 or so double tax treaty with different countries. So how do we increase that, and all of that? Fine document, fine policy, but it is what it is. It's just a policy. It doesn't have the force of law. You then need to have, because in the tax administration, there are different pillars. There is the policy, there is the law, the regulation, and then there is the administration. So of those 3 pillars, I think I would score the policy pillar an excellent grade. Fantastic document. What we should then have done is to then move that to the legislative block and look at our legislative framework. What laws do we have in place to bring to tax companies, our companies' income tax? Our companies' income tax, the 1979 Act, right? Value-added tax, which is more or less the most recent of our legislation for taxing. That was 1993, which was before the advent of internet in the country. And that's why the country is running in every direction, trying to tax the digital economy, trying to tax e-commerce and all of that.
They don't even understand the digital economy.
Because the regulatory framework predates those developments. There are terminologies, there are different ways of doing businesses now that is very completely alien to those legislation. 1979 Acts, all right? 1993. All right, Personal Income Tax Act and all of that. So what you would have expected, for example, during the height of the recession, I said we lost a golden opportunity because that was a time when everybody realized that something needs to happen within our tax system to be able to get this economy, out of the woods. And that should have been the time that we should have pushed in a lot of regulatory reform. Let's come up with new law. Let's make them nimble. Let's make them agile. Let's make them address the digital economy that we're now running. But, I mean, you all know how it went with a legislative agenda. I'm hoping that in this new administration, now that all the discord between executive and legislatures to be out of the way, let's move with speed, let's move with action. So, talking about the reform that you asked for, there's actually a reconstitution of that committee that's addressing the implementation of the national tax policy. So that committee has been inaugurated, I think it was inaugurated in August. They had their meeting, I think, last week in Abuja. And what they're coming up is, what are the changes we need to make to the laws? What new laws do we need to pass? What new bills do we need to send to the National Assembly? And if we do that on the back of a new national tax database, if we get through with the 45 million, so we know those who to be taxed, right? And we have a very effective regulatory framework to be able to tax them appropriately, I think we will move some step further.
Okay, so on the flip side of all of this, we've been able to point out what's making what is making it really difficult for a lot of Nigerians to pay their taxes and how cumbersome it is, the process and all of it. However, it's one thing to be able to formulate how to collect taxes from Nigerians, but on the flip side, how are we monitoring there's been an increase in revenue from taxes from 2015 up until now. But how are we able to regulate how much the money that has come in over the years that's supposed to come, increase government revenue and help in things like, roads and education and healthcare and all of that? How are we able to regulate that money coming in, that it's not siphoned? Because if you speak to a regular Nigerian, they will tell you they don't trust the fact that, they're paying taxes, they can't see what is being done in the country. So how, on the flip side, can we monitor the money that is coming in from taxpayers already?
No, I agree absolutely with you. And I mean, the intro to your question actually linked up to the third pillar, of the tax system. So the policy, the regulation, which it asks about, and then the administration. So there's a whole lot of things sitting with the tax authorities. So the FIRS, the State Internal Revenue Services, how can we ensure that all of the effort and all of the running after taxpayers, freezing bank accounts, and all of that, as much as it's sending some bit of negative tone into the economy, if we could counter that with a lot more transparency and accountability, at least we will begin to rewrite the narrative. So let people know that it's tough to pay tax. However, there's a judicious utilization of whatever comes in. From the NESG report, a significant percentage of Nigerians say they don't trust the tax authority, or they don't trust the government. And I think it's an open secret. There's a lot of agitation around probity, accountability, what's government doing. I mean, over the last few weeks, you see people trying to sign petition over how much they think an arm of government, for example, is budgeting for vehicles, for monitoring and inspection. They're probing into the executive. They're asking questions all around. If the government could be a lot more proactive in being more accountable, in being more transparent, I think we'll begin to resolve all of these challenges, right? So 5.32 trillion, for example, was what FRS collected, the last, which was like the record highest. I think the closest was in 2012. About 5 trillion or thereabouts.
But over 60% of that amount is used to service debt.
That's correct. That's correct. So
should that money be used to service debt?
So we have a lot of issues. You're servicing debt, and by the time you add to that, then recurrent expenditure, then you then realize that we probably have absolutely nothing left to fix huge infrastructure. So the government actually needs to do a lot more in being more accountable, more transparent, so that we can arouse, citizens' interest, to part with their money. But by the way, one theory that I think will begin to be a reality, that's my view as we move along, is that I think the level of citizens' involvement and asking of questions and all of that has been the way it is, because we assume this so-called mismanagement of our national wealth is just limited to oil money. So there's oil money, so loosely said, people are wasting our money. When it gets to the point where everybody pays a fair amount of taxes, and it pinches when you pay tax, I think the level of probing and asking of questions will increase, because it will no longer be our money, it will be my money. What's government doing with my money? And we need to get there, all right? So there's already a democratization of the process of disseminating information and asking questions with everyone on social microblogging site, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Everyone can hold the government accountable. And we need to get to that point where it becomes quite difficult for government not to be accountable to us. And we will get there when we are all participating and paying our fair share.
Two quick questions. Talking about accountability and then confidence on part of the people. Just recently, we saw the back and forth, a memo to the tax boss in the country by the chief of staff asking for, differentials in projections and actual collection. This sort of memo, does it improve? What sort of impact will it have on confidence of the people? Because you're talking about asking questions. Now, this is the government. asking questions from its employee. Do you think that will boost confidence? Secondly, starting January 2020, the FRS is looking at new stream of revenue, including the digital economy, 5% on domestic and international electronic transactions. How much of a difference would this make? Will it broaden this tax gap you're talking about?
Right, fantastic question. So I think the first one, my view is that we over-politicizing legitimate bureaucratic process. And I think it's happening because of the general climate. Everything in Nigeria gets politicized. I don't think it's unusual for agency of government to be asked to explain the difference between what the budget is and what the actual collection is. But sometimes the manner of approach and all of that, you could begin to read, some undertone connotation, and all of that. So I was surprised to see the letter in the social media, including the response of FRS and all of that. I think many of those things can be kept away from, from social media. It was just a legitimate question being asked, and I think the response of FRS was also very robust.
We need to quickly wrap up. If we could just move to the second question quickly. Will you widen the...
I don't think we have time for that. Thank you so much, Yomi.
Okay,
great one. Thank you so much as always.